some major developments in the Middle East regarding Iran, Israel, and Palestine. So joining us now is Executive Vice President at the Quincy Institute, Dr. Trita Parsi. Dr. Parsi, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. So, Dr. Parsi, let's discuss here in the context of the broader geopolitical situation, something you've tracked for a long time. So we have this conflict now between Israel and Hamas. However, there's been allegations, obviously, by the Israelis around Iranian involvement. Will this impact in any way an effort in order to get back into the Iran deal by the Biden administration? And just what does this generally show us about how the geopolitics have aligned in the Middle East?
I doubt that this will have any significant impact on the nuclear negotiations. The nuclear negotiations have been quite insulated from these developments, and not just these, many other political developments in Iran or in the United States or from allies of the United States in the region. However, it's providing a context that is going to make it more challenging in many different ways for the Biden administration. The Biden administration seems to have been rather unprepared for this development. And it appears to have come to some sort of an agreement with the Israelis that the United States will continue to shield the Israelis from any political criticism at the UN, will not speak much very harshly about the Israeli actions themselves, in hope that the Israelis will remain somewhat silent on the JCPOA. I find that to be a problematic give and take, an agreement between the two sides, if it is what has happened, because at the end of the day, I do not see any likelihood that the Netanyahu government will not come out swinging against the JCPOA if those negotiations end up being successful. So, and in the meantime, the United States is continuing to provide the Israelis a blank check for what they're doing in Gaza and inside of Israel itself, all of which do not serve U.S. interest in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, and so in the broader context, this is something we've talked a lot here about on the show, which is that in some context, people are saying, well, where are the Arab states? We almost have an explicit alignment now of the Arab states against Hamas with the Israeli government. This is something that's been percolating there for a while, and what does this tell us about prospects in the region?
You're quite correct. I mean, several of the Arab countries have great difficulties with Hamas for a variety of reasons. But to a very large extent, it's because they were trying to move closer to the United States. And this was part of what they needed to do in order to be able to retain a better relationship with the United States. I think the bigger issue here that I hope people are not missing is that the United States has provided numerous of its allies in the region with blank checks for quite some time. Those blank checks have led to those countries engaging in rather destabilizing and problematic behavior because they were shielded from the consequences of their own recklessness by the United States. When the United States then decided to withdraw that blank check from the Saudis, as it has now done more or less, we have seen that the Saudis have gone in a very different direction. The Saudis are now reaching out to the Iranians for their own diplomacy. They're trying to mend fences with the Turks. They've lifted the blockade on Qatar. They're trying to find an exit from the war in Yemen. All of things that actually are good. But as long as we provided that blank check, there was no reason for them to go in that direction. Now, imagine if we were to withdraw the blank check from the Israelis when it comes to this. I do not think they would be engaging in this type of excessive use of force as currently is taking place. And ultimately, it would be good for Israel itself. You know, back 30 years ago, when the Israelis and the Palestinian representatives were talking to each other quietly, secretly, outside of the Norwegian capital of Oslo, Uri Savir, who was the lead negotiator on the Israeli side, explained to the Palestinians that part of the reason why they wanted to end the occupation of Palestine was because, in his own words, the occupation was corrupting our youth. 30 years later, I think we've seen clear evidence of that. This is ultimately undermining the very foundation of Israel's own democratic system. And as a result, as a friend of Israel, it is of no interest of the United States to enable Israel to go in a direction that ultimately undermines the very democratic foundation of that country itself, while at the same time destabilizing the region, seeing a massive loss of human life, and undermining the U.S.'s own interests.
Mm-hmm. And to give a similar example, perhaps, in the context of Saudi Arabia, did the U.S. fare better by allowing the Saudi Arabians to do whatever they wanted in Yemen, or did it hurt U.S. interests in the region?
It absolutely hurted U.S. interests. It absolutely hurted U.S. interests to do so because we were complicit in all of the killings that were taking place. And incidentally, remember what the U.S. was saying while it was still supporting the Saudis. it kept on saying that the Saudis have a right to defend themselves. That ended up becoming the type of argument that was used in order to allow the killing to continue. We're using the same argument right now in case of the Israelis. It is not helping the Israelis, it's not helping the Palestinians, certainly, and it's ultimately not good for the United States itself. We have even David Petraeus, who a couple of years ago came out and explained, although he withdrew it after a lot of criticism, that a lot of the challenges the United States is facing is because of the support that it's giving to numerous countries, but in this case specifically to Israel, when it came to the occupation of Palestine and the subjugation of the Palestinian people. We cannot engage in this type of behavior and believe that it will not backlash on us. It's just thinking, and we've seen that very clearly.
I think it's an important point. Thank you, sir. Appreciate you joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Next on Rising, Jeremy Corbell is going to discuss that story behind newly obtained UFO footage in 60 Minutes when Rising returns.